Hello all, welcome back. Today we are going to discuss how do we create a Windows-based virtual machine using Azure Portal. If you remember in our previous session we discussed that there are various ways of creating Azure resources like Portal, PowerShell, command line interface, mobile app and even using the language SDKs. But for a starter, we are going to now create a virtual machine using the Azure Portal. So the agenda is what are the different resources that are internally used for creating an Azure VM? What is the criteria to select the VM size? How do we plan our storage and the network? Okay, so for a change, this time we will directly jump in the demo and directly understand from the portal itself as to what are the different things that we are talking here. So let's open portal.azure.com as the starting point for us to create an Azure VM. When we say Azure VM, it is nothing but a virtual machine which is present on the cloud, which can be created on demand and as well as auto-scalable. They are similar to the virtual machines which are present on the Hyper-V, just that it is present on the cloud. So in order to create a virtual machine, you can either create a resource from here. It takes you to the Azure Marketplace. You can select the Marketplace for Windows Server based virtual machines, and it takes you to a wizard where you can select the operating system. These are the range of operating systems that are available on the Windows Server platform. You can click on create, or you can also start with a preset configuration. Otherwise, another way of doing it is go to all services and virtual machines, and here you can add a new virtual machine. So let's use this wizard. So the first tab in the wizard is, or the first page in the wizard is the basics. So the subscription, I'm going to use the free trial subscription, resource group. So let me create a new resource group for putting all my virtual machines in it. So basically consider a resource group like a folder where all your items are present. A resource group is similar parent level entity where all your resources are present. This would be my name of the virtual machine. The region where you want to keep this virtual machine, I'm just randomly picking up a US region. As of now, let's say no infrastructure redundancy is required. So this is from the business continuity point of view. If you remember in our very first sessions, we have discussed that how Azure provides us with automatic options for business continuity with respect to availability. So we'll study this in detail, but just remember that there was an option on this wizard where you could select a type of availability, either a zone or a set. But as of now, I'll go for no infrastructure redundancy required. Image, going to select a Windows-based image. Windows, this is fine. So Azure Spot instance is again a cost saving mechanism from Azure where unused capacity is used. So as of now, I'm going with the default option. The size is an important criteria. The main important things that we have to, remember is what is the CPU, the RAM, the data disks, and what are the max input-output operations that you're expecting. What is the temporary storage? Is it available? And is premium disk supported or not? So based on the various categories, we have different series like B series, D series. Okay, so I'm going to go with the general purpose B series, which is the most cheapest option here, with one CPU, 0.5 GB RAM, 2 data disks, and maximum 160 input output operations per second. And it has a premium disk support as well as a temporary storage. So I'm going to select this option. I'm going to say this is going to be my Azure admin user and a password which needs to be at least 12 characters long with. So the next setting here is, do you want to open any network ports when you're accessing this VM from the public internet? Yes, I want to enable RDP port. I'm going to also enable the HTTP ports for the inbound. And there is an option here, if you already have a license, then you can, save the licensing cost. If not, go for the default option. Next, I'm going to go for the disks. So in this form, we are going to make some of the storage decisions for the VM. Azure VMs have one operating system disk where the operating system related files are placed, and a temporary disk based on the VM size that you have selected, whether there was a temporary disk option available or not. Remember that temporary disk is for short-term storage. Whenever your VM restarts, all the files present in that temporary disk are going to get deleted. And in addition, you can also add more data disks, for storing more information, especially if your VM, the purpose of the VM is a SQL Server database. So you might require additional data disks, which you can add it from here. So one thing to note here is the type of the disks that are available. At a very high level, there are two types: hard disk drive or HDD and solid state drive or SSD. Hard disk drive is the more traditional based drive, whereas the solid state drive is a modern technology where it provides us with better performance and better latency, and of course the cost is going to be higher. And if you see here in SSD, you have both options, standard and premium. We generally choose a standard if we have to work with normal workloads, and if we have to work with intensive workloads or mission critical systems which need to process data very quickly, then we go for a premium SSD. So for the purpose of the demo, I'm going to choose a standard SSD. It's suggesting that we go for a premium SSD because premium SSD also works with high IOPS workloads. Alright, encryption type, I'm going to leave it by default. So now again, data disks, let us say that I want to add additional data disks. I'm going to start with an empty disk, and 1 GB disk is okay, and default encryption type. Even here, if you see that the disk type got selected as premium SSD. Now when I go to the advanced section, I can see that there is an option called use managed disks or not. By default, managed disks is the option that is used, but if you do not want the Azure to manage your disk, you can always go ahead and disable that option. That means you're now going to use an unmanaged disk, and you are responsible for creating an underlying storage account. So with unmanaged disk, we are responsible for the storage accounts that will be holding the VHDs or the data disks underlying. And we only pay for the amount of storage that we are using inside the storage account. However, you please have to note that the storage account has a fixed capacity of 20,000 IOPS, right? If you want to go higher because your workload is critical, then you will have to scale out by creating more than one storage accounts, and that could get a little complicated. Hence, the best or the recommended way is to allow Azure to do the underlying disks management, and hence we are going to choose use managed disks as yes. This means that you have more reliability, better security as well, and the underlying IOPS, everything is managed by Azure itself. The next option here is networking, which is very important. The first thing to do is create a virtual network. If the virtual network is already created, you can go ahead and select it, or you can always create a new virtual network. So imagine a virtual network as a fundamental block where all the resources within the virtual network can securely communicate with each other. Basically, it's like a logical isolation of that particular VNet from the other VNet, and the resources within one VNet can securely communicate to each other. So by default, it has given us a CIDR address range. So that means that all the VMs or all the resources within that particular virtual network can get to one of these 256 addresses. Now, one virtual network you can divide in multiple subnets, and this is the default subnet, which means that all the 256 addresses are present in this particular subnet. I'm going to select OK. So that's the default subnet that gets created. Public IP. So for the VMs that you're going to create, you can access the internet from the VMs automatically. But for anyone to access your VM from a public network, you have to enable a public IP. So I'm going to leave this option where it's going to create a new public IP by name test VM1 IP. Okay. Now these other options we are going to leave it as is default, which is the network security group, which is the basic security group, and by default we have already allowed some of the ports, and we are not doing any accelerated networking and neither load balancing. Management, again this is for monitoring and security purposes. I'm going to keep the default options. Do you also want to enable auto shutdown and enable auto backups? So this is a little bit advanced. So even here I want to leave the default options. We can also give some tags. What is this VM used for? And then I can go ahead and create it. So currently what it's doing is validating your selections. It's basically reviewing it. Once the review is complete, we can go ahead and click on the create button. Alright, so the validation is now passed. Now I can go ahead and click on create. If you see, it has now redirected me to the deployment section where it is creating all the resources required for the virtual machine. The resource group is created, the NIC, the NSG, the public IP, the virtual network. So now my deployment is complete. I can now go to the resource and see whether I can connect to it. So I'll be clicking connect here, and I want to connect it using RDP. The other options are SSH and Bastion that we will eventually look in next videos. So I'm going to download the RDP file here. So I'm going to use the same user and password that I gave when I was creating the virtual machine. This is the public IP that it has created, 23.101.138.231, and I have logged into the virtual machine. So in order to see my VM in action, I'm going to install the IIS on this VM. For that, I'm opening Windows PowerShell. I could also install the IIS feature directly from the server manager. Install Windows feature. The name of the feature is web server, and I'm going to include management tools. So the iOS feature is now installed. I'm opening a browser and checking whether the default port 80 website is up. Yes, so the iOS default website is up. Now in order to see this VM in actual action, I'm going to try to access this default page from my host machine outside the VM. So I'm going back to the portal, and on the virtual machine overview page, I can see that the public IP address is this one. I'm just going to copy it to the clipboard, and I'm going to open the HTTP portal with this. And if you see here, I'm able to access the VM from my laptop. So very quick recap, let's go back to the PowerPoint deck. So these are the important settings that you have to remember in the wizard. First one is basic settings. Here you give the subscription name, the resource group, the instance details, name of the virtual machine, region, availability, and the administrator account details. What are the inbound port rules that you have to enable? Do you have a license? So the VM size is an important criteria that you have to remember, and have kept a small table here for you to select the right series. So if it is a general use computing or testing and development, then you go for B or D series. If it's heavy on computation or you are expecting medium traffic web servers, F series. Similarly, for larger memory usage database servers, E and G series are some of the important guidelines that you have to remember while selecting the right VM size. Disks, again, here you select whether you want to use SSD or HDD, managed versus unmanaged. In the networking section, you select a virtual network, a subnet, a public IP, and inbound ports. In the management section, here you enable any of the monitoring like boot diagnostics and OS diagnostics. Do you want to enable the auto shutdown, enable backup, some management related. In advanced, if you want to do some post deployment extension deployments automatically, you could do here. You can add some tags, and then finally you review and create. So in this way you create a virtual machine from the portal. In the next video we will try to create a Linux based virtual machine from the portal. Thank you so much. Stay tuned.